Hey everyone, just a few quick things before we get started. Don't forget to sign the attendance sheet. It's just real simple. Just ask you two questions. Kind of looks like this. But that's pretty much it. Please enjoy. Hope you all learned something. Okay, welcome back everybody. This is SI worksheet number 4. And today we're going to be going over structures or structs. And if y'all have any questions, just remember that y'all can come to my office hours. Okay, so the first question I have is, what is a structure or a struct? So, a struct is essentially a grouping of variables, of different variables. Of different variables that relate to each other. So it's really helpful when you're creating something where a few different variables relate to each other, and so you can create a structure that is able to hold all of these different variables. It is also a user-defined data type. So a struct is like a data type in a sense, except you're able to define what goes in this data type with different variables. And this will become clear as we go on. Okay. This next question is, do variables in a struct have to follow a specific format or order? So what I mean by this is, like, is it easy to rearrange the variables? Do you have to have certain variables or a certain number of variables? And the answer is no. Besides following general C++ guidelines for defining variables. Okay, now the next question I have is, if you wanted to make a structure called node, how would you fill the blank? So in this case, we have a structure called node, and so it's basically just asking us to kind of start defining it. And so it's real simple. It's just going to be struct. So when you're creating a new data type, when you're defining a struct, all you need is struct and then the name to start defining it. Okay? And it says next question I have is, what goes inside the brackets of a struct? And so all that goes inside the brackets is the different variables being grouped together. Okay? Oh, and so this is a very important one. It says, what is required after the closing bracket for a struct? And so this is very important. It's a semicolon, which is kind of unusual. Usually, you don't put semicolons after brackets, but for a structure, after you finish defining the bracket, you need to put a closing semicolon. Okay, so the next question I have is, once you've defined your struct, how do you set an element inside your struct variable to be equal to something? And so what this is asking, it's like if we had a structure called node, let's say it had a variable called value, how would you set that variable within that structure to be equal something within main? And so what we use is called the dot operator. Okay, so, and it looks something like, it's just a period, right? So I don't know how to highlight this period. I'm just gonna put it in a parentheses. Anyways, so let's say we had a structure called node, right? And so let's say in main we had a node, and we called it temp. Okay, and then so to set the value of temp inside something, we would do temp dot or period value is equal to, and let's say value is an integer 5. Oh, my bad. 5. And so you do dot and then the name of the variable within the structure that you try to set equal to something. So it's the name of the structured variable, a dot, and then the name of the variables within the structure. So it can get a little confusing. You'll see later on when we code some stuff how it's all gonna look and play out. Okay. So the next question I have is, how do you compare two structs? So it's just like an array, right? You can't compare two entire arrays, right? You have to compare them element by element. So that's what we also do for structures. So you can't compare you can't compare an entire struct to another entire struct. You have to compare them element by elements. Except in this case, unlike arrays, the elements are different variables within the structure. So let's say we still working with that temp variable, the temporary node. Let's say we had another one called current node. You couldn't do temp equal to current. That wouldn't work. You'd have to do temp.value is equal to current.value. So this one right here won't work, so we don't want to use that one. But we do want to use this. So you just remember when you're comparing, it's just like arrays. You just have to compare element by element, or in this case, variable by variable. Okay, so how do you initialize a structure? To initialize a structure, let's say we're creating a new node called previous node. So it's just node previous, right? Then we set the equal sign because we're trying to initialize it, which means we're trying to set it to equal something as we declare it. Bracket, open up a bracket. And then, so let's say node only has the integer value in it. So let's say we set it equal to 8. And then you close the brackets and then the semicolon. So you pass the variables that you have within the brackets. Now let's say you had a different structure, something that required multiple entries. So let's say you had an integer and then a double, but then they also had like a char, and you can even do strings, and you can keep going for as long as the variables you have. But you always kind of want to put them in order so that it puts them in the right variable locations, in variable spots. Okay, whoops, my bad. But can you have, alright, so the next question is, can you have an array of structures? If so, how would you define it? Well, if that didn't give it away, and if this doesn't give it away, you can have a variable of structures. Sorry. You can't have an array of structs. How would you define it? So this is very similar to just defining a variable for a struct. So you would just type the name of the structure, and then let's say we want to call this, let's just call it an array, and then you remember you either do the array size or you initialize it somehow. We're just gonna give it a size of 7. And so, but basically, it's similar to how you declare an array and how you declare a structure, in the sense that this is just the data type and this is just the array name and the size. Okay, so how would you initialize an array of structs? So you can't just initialize a struct like you would an array, like you would in a regular array, right? Because it has multiple values to it. So let's just start by creating a new array. We're going to call it list this time, so we're just not repeating. Let's say we have 3 items in the list. Set it equal, open brackets, just like an array. But here's where it gets different, right? Because you have multiple values. And so if this is how you initialize a struct, we're kind of going to go off this to initialize an array of structures. Okay, well, let's say node has value, but it also has a char, okay? So you want to open a bracket, and you want to pass each variable. So it has a value, but then it also has like a char. Okay, and then so this is going to be your first element, a node with 6, 3. I mean, 6, C. So your first element is going to be a node with 6, C. I mean, 6 and then char C, and 6 and char C. And then your second node, you put a comma, you go down, and you open brackets again. Let's say this one's 2, B. Okay, and then you just keep filling this out until you have both the number of elements in the node and the number of elements in the array. And let's make this one 3A, why not? Okay, and then once you reach the end, there's no comma after that, put a closing bracket, and don't forget your semicolon. But that's essentially how you would initialize an array of structures. Okay, well, let's move on to some coding exercises. It says create a structure called date that includes the day, month, year, and weekday. So let's open online GDB. Okay, do some fixing real quick. Always include IOStream and using namespace. Okay, and we'll just delete this. Okay, and so here's an important thing that I didn't get to mention earlier, but whenever you're defining a struct, you always want to do it outside main. So we have our struct here. What did we want to call it? We wanted to call it date. So we'll call it date. And we want it to include the day, month, year, and weekday. So we'll have int day, int month, and int year. And then we can also do string weekday. And so since we're using strings, we're going to need to come over here and include the string header. And actually, you know what? Let's make month a string too. So we'll do like this. Oh, well, we'll put string up first, then the day, then the month. Okay, and so are we done? If you said yes, you were not quite right. If you said no, you were right, because we still need to put the semicolon after the bracket. This is very important. Do not forget this. And so let's see. Okay, and then this is all the structs call for. So then let's say we wanted to create a date, and we're going to say today. And so let's say we want to initialize it. We could do today is Wednesday. I apologize for my spelling. Wednesday, the day is the 22nd. the month is April, and the year is 2020. And then let's see out current date is, and then we do today dot weekday, right? Today dot month, today dot day, and then today dot year. And let's go ahead and add some formatting. Okay. And so let's just see what that looks like. Oh, look, there we go. Probably could have formatted that a little bit better, but I mean, that worked perfectly. Thank you all for making it all the way through this video. Here's a little way of saying thank you.